Missile strikes, helicopter crashes, constant tank bombardment, debris lying everywhere. The new year has not been kind to the innocent Ukrainians, displacing more than 2.3 million people and leaving more than 1 million in peril. The Russia-Ukraine war enters another episode of intense battle. After months of posturing, while simultaneously denying any plans to attack, Russian President Vladimir Putin's assault on multiple cities in Ukraine began overnight on February 24th and have continued to wreak havoc day and night since then. It would not be an overstatement if we say that the Russian troops, with their blitzkrieg approach, seemed unstoppable in the beginning. Town after town fell in the hands of the invaders, but it was then that, remarkably, the numerically inferior Ukrainian troops put up a fierce defense and they somehow managed to halt the Russian onslaught. But as the battle continues at various fronts, the fate of the Ukrainians lies in the hands of their alliances. On one hand, Germany and France have vowed to support Ukraine. Poland too has shown intent to send their nemesis Leopard tanks to Ukraine. But the million-dollar question is this support sufficient to resist the Kremlin's military superiority? It was not long ago when Warsaw had shown intent to send a company of Leopard tanks to Ukraine, around 14 tanks. More than 20 countries operate the tanks, some of which include Canada, Denmark, Sweden, and Spain. It is believed that both Ukraine and Russia are planning an offensive to break the deadlock in a war that has changed into a test of resilience and attrition in eastern and southern Ukraine. At the same time, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky is coping with some corruption scandals, which came as a big blow in Ukraine's campaign to gain Western support in its war against the Kremlin. According to the Western media, Ukrainian officials have been pleading with their allies to provide them with the Leopards as soon as possible, as they can prove critical in their effort to resist the Russian onslaught. Germany has argued that exporting military equipment like the Leopard tanks, which are offensive weapons, risks drawing the West further into the conflict, which is not desired at all. And there are also apprehensions that such decisions could escalate the war further. Let's not forget that after significant advances by the Ukrainian military in the second half of 2022, there has been little to no progress on both sides, and it seems like the war has entered a stagnant position. But according to Andriy Yermak, Ukraine's chief of army staff, Ukraine will be needing those tanks to proceed with their advance and drive the Russians out to their home soil. But it seems pretty clear that Warsaw is more than willing to provide Ukraine with the tanks it needs, regardless of Berlin's permission. But it is not only the military support that Ukraine seems to be getting hold of. In another meeting, the European Union foreign ministers have agreed to provide another 500 million euros to Ukraine. And this is massive for Ukraine, as it has been coping with inflation and economic degradation that has halted any sort of growth whatsoever. But the question that needs to be addressed is, can Western-made heavy tanks push back Russian troops and break the Ukraine war stalemate? The Polish Leopard tanks might be hanging in the balance right now, but there is another player in this game of tanks that has assured Ukraine of its support. The battle balance may be set to shift after Britain announced it will send Kyiv the Western-made heavy tanks it has long been calling for. Western leaders have been taking their steps carefully, continuously resisting pleas from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky for more powerful battle tanks, which will help push back Russia's invasion. Britain has made a solid pledge that it will send 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine, which can help them gain a concrete advantage in the spring offensive that is pretty much on the cards. Now you guys think that if Germany succumbs to the pressure and authorizes the export of its mighty Leopard tanks, which are often considered as the best tanks in Europe, things might take a different turn. But there were already signs heftier ground support would soon be rolling in from European allies. Let's not forget that NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told German media on Sunday that the war was in a decisive phase, and it was important to provide Ukraine with the weapons it needs to succeed. The comments came amid renewed missile attacks by Moscow targeting multiple Ukrainian cities. A multi-story residential building, where officials said about 1,700 people lived, was struck in the southeastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro on Saturday, killing at least 30 innocent people, giving clear signs of what lies ahead and that the Kremlin is not here to wander. It goes without saying that Ukraine has been expanding as well as diversifying its military arsenal with the latest weapons due to the aid it has been receiving. But not to forget the impressive Patriot air defense system, which the Biden administration finally sent after months of delay. But as the war becomes static and battle lines barely shift, Russia has been taking aim at Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. Now it has to be noted that Ukraine's Western allies have been sending in more than 300 modernized Soviet tanks, and to compound everything, earlier this month, France, Germany, and the United States respectively promised French AMX-10 RC light tanks 40 German Marder infantry vehicles, and 50 Bradley fighting vehicles and more. Military support at this critical juncture can be of utmost importance for Kyiv, after having lost a Soledar and some territories in southern Ukraine. While the fight on the ground seems to be taking a hot turn, the battle in the skies has also taken a major leap. What's next for Ukraine air defense as Russia ramps up civilian strikes in its fight for the skies? As the Kremlin continues to launch airstrikes on the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, the fight for the skies has become largely important. All eyes are on the skies in Ukraine. It goes without saying that the Kremlin wants to devastate the energy infrastructure that will ultimately weaken the desperate defense put up by Kyiv. Over the past 2 weeks, Moscow has unleashed its largest wave of missile and kamikaze drone attacks since the start of the 9-month war. According to some sources, Moscow is trying to deplete the Ukrainian air defense system so that it can launch a full offensive to take hold of major Ukrainian cities. Western allies, particularly across Europe, have been clearing out old warehouses and sending air defense systems still lying around from the Cold War to boost Ukraine's coverage. One of these sophisticated air defense systems coming in from the West are NASAMS, but as the war stretches on, even advanced air defense systems like NASAMS can have capability and maneuverability limitations. The U.S. sped up the delivery of the first 2 NASAMS and has pledged to send in 6 more. Jointly produced by the U.S. and Norway, the medium-range air defense system uses a combination of sensors and radars to detect and defend against cruise missiles, aircraft, and drones. It also includes a mobile radar system, a control and command center where soldiers can monitor threats, and a separate launcher. The trailer-based system can be easily moved to different locations, which can prove critical, especially on the southern front where mobility is of utmost importance. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has claimed that NASAMS have a 100% success rate in intercepting Russian missiles, which was denied by the Russian defense minister as always. Although the NASAMS only have a range of about 30 to 40 kilometers, they're already having a devastating effect on the Russian offensive, which can prove to be a vital point if Kyiv wants to gain any advantage whatsoever. The war has brought havoc for the innocent Ukrainian civilians. The streets, alleys, and city center that once used to be full of joy and zeal are now under the shadows of this cruel war. What lies ahead can be crucial for the peace and stability of the continent, but one thing is for sure: the devastation and havoc it has brought upon the Ukrainian civilians will be remembered forever.